What's up, .NET developers? We're going to do things a little bit differently today. We've talked about a lot about the services and different things from concept perspective inside of AWS. But I want to show you a tool that you can use today, whether or not you're an AWS customer or not, that you can use to help modernize your .NET Framework apps. So let's go along. This is the Porting Assistant for .NET from AWS edition of AWS for the .NET developer. What's up, .NET developers? Isaac Levin here with another edition of AWS for the .NET developer. If you're liking the content here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow, share along, and let me know what other content you want to see. I'm excited to hear about some of the great things that you're building on AWS with .NET. All right, so to this point, we've talked a lot about AWS services, concepts inside of AWS that .NET developers should be aware of if they're going to be using AWS as a cloud provider. But there are a handful of other folks I'd like to talk to as well, specifically right now. And those are the folks that are maintaining .NET Framework applications. We understand that some of us don't have the luxury to play around with the latest versions of the .NET, but you can. And I want to show some tools that exist to help us modernize our .NET Framework apps to the latest versions of .NET 6, .NET 7. And one of those tools I'm going to showcase today is the Porting Assistant for .NET. And it's like, again, it's just a tool to make your life easier. It's not going to solve all of your problems, but it can help you get to a point where you can start to really take advantage of some of the latest innovations in .NET. And I want to show you a little bit, set the stage with a little bit of context before I show a really, really cool demo as it pertains to that. So the first thing I want to just call out is that porting is hard. Right? So even though .NET Framework and .NET Core, .NET 6, .NET 7, you can write the apps in VB, you can write the apps in C#. They have a lot in common, but specifically there are problems when we go from .NET Framework to .NET 6 and .NET 7. One of those keys being is NuGet dependencies, right? So there isn't a guarantee that the NuGet packages they're using today are still used or the best options for an app that's rewritten or repurposed to be .NET 6 or .NET 7. There, you have to look at some of these things. Also, you have to assess portability. So is your application currently compatible with the latest versions of .NET 6, .NET 7, right? You could be taking advantage of APIs that are no longer relevant or deprecated. And then finally, it's a lot of manual work, right? Like this idea that we can just flip a switch and our apps are .NET Framework 4.5 and now they're .NET 6 or .NET 7, it's more than likely not 100% feasible based on your use case, but there are some tools out there to help us along the way. And one of the tools that I'd love to show today is the Porting Assistant for .NET. So if you're not familiar with the Porting Assistant for .NET, it's an open source tool that assesses and ports .NET Framework apps to .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET 6, and as of a couple of weeks ago, .NET 7. So it's available as both a standalone tool, which means it's an executable that runs in Windows, as well as a Visual Studio extension, Visual Studio 2019 and 2022 to be exact. Like I mentioned, it's open source on GitHub, and I'll show you some of the links to that later. It supports .NET Framework 3.5 all the way up, like I mentioned, to .NET 6 and .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 7. There's support for MVC class libraries, and we'll even help you migrate from WCF on .NET Framework to Core WCF, which is the open source .NET Core, .NET 6 implementation of WCF. So I'll show you some of the examples in a bit. And there are a bunch of other interesting things that are coming. We're looking at options for web forms to Blazor and other sort of things to really help folks get to where they want to be as it pertains to the latest versions of .NET. And how it works is you run some assessments on your solutions, on your projects, and it provides assisted porting. And we'll take a look at what that means in a second. But here are some screenshots of what the experience looks like. So on the left-hand side, you have that visualization tool, that standalone tool like I mentioned, and then, or if you want to stay inside of Visual Studio, you have the ability to take a look at some of the options inside of Visual Studio for what you want to do. What Porting Assistant does, there's about 3 some odd different things that I like to think about. The number one is that it provides code translation features. So automating some of those porting experiences from .NET Framework to .NET Core. So there's a predefined set of rules, and there's a GitHub link that defines what those rules are. So it identifies common issues as Entity Framework or MVC, and it makes changes to the source code to reduce that manual work that we were talking about a bit earlier. Also, if you're porting an MVC project from .NET Framework to .NET 6, .NET 7, these are some of the steps the porting assistant will do. It creates a new compatible SDK style format of the CS proj. It updates your namespaces. It adds the required template files if needed. It archives the existing .NET Framework files. And then other code changes like interface declarations and invocation expressions, those are done for you. And finally, there's this idea of database code porting as well. So if you're using Entity Framework or ADO.NET, it adds specific NuGet packages if needed and does updates and adds some boilerplate code in particular cases, right? So in some cases, the porting process will also migrate your connection strings to the new app settings file in .NET Core. So I actually wanted to show you a quick demo of this. So let's hop into a demo and take a look at some of the ways Porting Assistant for .NET can help us really one-up our modernization journey. Now let's look at a couple of ways that we can use the Porting Assistant for .NET from AWS to get that one step closer to modernizing our .NET Framework applications to .NET 6. So I'm going to open up the standalone version of the Porting Assistant. And this is, like I said, this is free available. You can download this, and there'll be a link in the video to it, as well as it's available on GitHub where you can take a look at some of the stuff that's going on there. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you first install the Porting Assistant is you can take a look at the settings, and you can specify a target framework if you like. So in this particular case, I have the LTS version of .NET, which is .NET 6. I can also do .NET Standard, which is the standard term support, or .NET Core 3.1 if I want as well. So the next thing that I do is then I can assess solutions. So in this particular case, I've already assessed some, but how I would want to assess a new one is by clicking on Assess and go Choose. And this will come up with some options. So then I can go to like into my dev folder and just specifies a random project. For instance, this is a .NET Framework version of doingsoft.json, and then specify that. And once I click open that solution file, it's just a matter of clicking assess, and then it's going to go through all the steps that we talked about a bit earlier as it pertains to assessing the solution and coming up with options for modernizing. But this does take a little bit of time. So what I've done is I've already done this to a couple of projects already. So one project is a bit more complex than the other, and we'll talk a little bit about both of them. But when you have a solution assessed, you have this assess solutions window, or this pane of this particular application. And the first one that I'm going to take a look at is the more complex one, which is NOP Commerce. So if you've not heard of NOP Commerce, it's a e-commerce platform, open source e-commerce platform. It's available on GitHub. You can actually take a look at the code and clone it and use it to build an e-commerce experience with shopping cart and things like that for your business if you like. But when you assess a project or assess a solution in this case, using the Porting Assistant for .NET, you are given this assessment overview, which includes a handful of really pertinent, valuable information. So for instance, you can take a look at the incompatible NuGet packages that exist. You can look at incompatible APIs, build errors in this particular case, and then you can look at each individual project and what framework they are, where they're referenced, and so on and so forth. But what's interesting is that there's additional features outside of this that you could use to kind of build that story to really showcase how modernization can really and what needs to be done as a part of the modernization effort. And the first thing that I'd like to show people is the project reference graph. So just being able to look at all of the interdependencies between all the projects in a solution in a holistic way is really valuable. And what the Porting Assistant does is it does just that for you. So you can take a look, for instance, in this case, this NOP.core project, like it's being referenced by almost every other project in this solution. And when we're going through the process of actually saying, hey, should we migrate this project? Should we modernize this project? It might be valuable to take a look at which ones are going to be the least disruptive, right? So if I, for instance, was to upgrade NOP.core, it would break the builds for all these other projects, which is not a great experience in most cases. But however, you can pick one that maybe doesn't have any dependencies or has a smaller amount of dependencies and go from there. But just this view in general, I think is very, very valuable. And when folks see this view, not a lot of tools give you this sort of experience right from the get, so it's really, really valuable. Another thing that you can do is you can take a look at NuGet packages at the solution level as well as the project level. So you can take a look and say, for instance, AutoFac or AutoFac.MVC and Entity Framework, SQL Server Compact. You can see that all of these are being referenced by projects. And I can actually get this information at the project level. So for instance, let's take a look at this NOP.core project. And as you can see, we have that same amount of some of those packages we mentioned earlier in the particular versions of them, how many source files those NuGet packages are referenced, how many APIs, and then whether or not they're compatible. A newer version is compatible, right? And if there is compatibility there, it'll actually show you what the suggested replacement is. And this is really valuable as it pertains to upgrading NuGet packages in general. Obviously as a part of the modernization journey, but also just making sure that you're taking the latest versions of these NuGet packages that are available. So you can do that, and you can click into some of these, which is really, really cool. Or you can click into individual APIs that are going on and see at a high level what APIs are being used and what the source code files are being referenced in, and if there is compatibility there between those particular APIs and .NET 6, .NET 7, right? And then finally, you can actually take a look at source code in particular cases. And for instance, let's take a look at some incompatible API calls that the porting assistant has detected, right? So in this particular case, there's an incompatible method invocation for this memory cache method right here. So like for instance, this right here, it's incompatible now. So it'll actually take a look and show, hey, this version, in this particular version of this NuGet package, or in this particular version of this this NuGet package that you're using, this is the way that you might do it, but in the future, this isn't going to work because this method signature is different for some particular case. We can actually take a look at some other options that it gives you, right? So for instance, you can scroll down here and this says, hey, why don't you take a look at this particular method invocation? And let's actually see if we can find one. I believe there's one in, let's just take a step back. I'm trying to look for one that gives you a bit more information. So let's take a look at, it's this, discount map. So these are still incompatible method invocation. I wanted to show you one where, let's just nop.services. Hopping around. Sorry, I wanted to show like some other examples of some of the different messages that it gives you. What PDF service? Let's try this one. All right, so incompatible method invocation still, incompatible method invocation. So a lot of it is around, hey, the method signature is different, some of these APIs have changed, but in other cases it'll actually say, in this particular version, do it this way, right? So it'll give you actual options in a lot of cases, which I think is really, really valuable. As you can see, like in some cases, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of code that will need to get changed in some sense. And obviously, going through this, so you can build that rich assessment, that rich piece of information as it pertains to understanding what you need to do to modernize your applications. And if you want to, you can click this port button. This port, it would actually start going through the process of making a lot of those changes that I mentioned earlier that are well documented. However, the number one thing is your code probably won't build. So let's take a look at a solution where I can actually port an application and it will just work. So let's take a step back and look at our noonsoft.json project. So noonsoft.json, if you're not familiar, it's a NuGet package. It's the number one downloaded NuGet package at the time of this recording. And it really helps you in interacting and processing JSON data in different ways. So the biggest examples are serializing and deserializing .NET objects into stringified JSON data. But anyway, I found a particular version of this project, and it's in .NET Framework 4.5. And as you can see here, I have all the same things as earlier. I only have a few source files that have incompatible API calls, but I can actually click this port button here, and it would actually port this project to .NET 6, and I could reference it in another project. I can also do this inside of Visual Studio. So I can click on View in Visual Studio, and what this will do is this will actually open this project inside of Visual Studio, and I can get a very similar experience too. So let me just move over my Visual Studio window over to this page right here. All right, so as you can see here, and again, I can just open one of these files. And again, this is C#. I can't double click on this project because it is not a .NET Framework project, I can look at the build properties, obviously. But I also, since I have the extension installed, I can go to extensions and go to porting assistant for .NET. Wait for it to load here. I got some stuff going on in the background in Visual Studio. So, Porting Assistant for .NET, and I can run full assessment with Porting Assistant. And what this will do is it will do something similar to what the Standalone tool does. It will assess all of the NuGet packages, all of the APIs that are being referenced, and then it will, in my error window here, it will provide options or things that are incompatible targeting the newest versions of .NET. And while that's doing that, let's just take a look at this. So I can go to Settings here, and this will pop up in my Visual Studio settings, and I can choose the target framework as well as the AWS region where I want to test this application, the situation where I want to go that next step and deploy it. And we can talk about that in another video. So while this is building out, it's important to call out too that all of this is completely free to use. You don't have to be an AWS customer. You don't have to have your code hosted in AWS. This is a free tool. It's available on GitHub, a free tool as well as free extension that allows you to get more information about your .NET applications, .NET Framework applications, and what it would take to get for them to the latest versions of .NET 6 and .NET 7. So let's take a quick pause here and wait for this to come back, because this does take a little bit of time sometimes. So when we get back, we will have a project that is fully assessed inside of Visual Studio. And now that our assessment is complete, we'll have a little banner that says assessment successful, as well as in the warning section of the error list pane in Visual Studio, we have some lines that we can actually take a look at further. In this particular case, we would need to update this code to make our app compatible with .NET 6 in this case. And as mentioned before, we can go in to here and we can actually port the solution or port the project to .NET Core as well. So we could do that. And this is going to go through that same process. It's going to do the assessment. It's going to actually start to make those coding changes. But instead of doing that, let's do something else. So let's close the solution, and then let's just create a new project. And in this project, I'm just going to create a simple console app, and then I'm going to reference an existing version of Newtonsoft that I've ported. I ported it earlier from .NET Framework to .NET 6. So let's just do that. So I'll create this project, and then I'm going to add a reference in the solution to that existing project, and then I'm going to just wire it all up. So let's do this here. Let's go here, add existing project. Wait for this to pop up, and then go into here, this folder called ported, and then I'm going to go down and select this CS project. So this is going to load up the CS project, and I can validate that this is, again, a .NET 6 application. So here I am in this .NET application here. As you can see, it's .NET 6. It's just not using top-level statements, which is fine. In this particular case, what I want to do is I want to just do a simple test of serializing and deserializing JSON using this new Newtonsoft .NET 6 class project that I converted earlier. So what I want to do is I just want to create a list, and that list is just going to be a new list of string, and then let's just say foo and bar. All right. So nothing crazy here. And then what I want to be able to do is I want to serialize that list into JSON. So how I can do that is I could just do JSON convert, right? Oops. Control dot here, make sure that it gets up. So hold on one more time. Add reference to newtonsoft.json, and then I go serialize, and then I just pass it in my list. And then the next thing, I just want to console.writeLine out this particular JSON file, right? So nothing crazy, and then we'll just add a console.readline at the bottom so the terminal doesn't close. Okay, so what is this code going to do? It's going to take it's going to create a new list of strings with two items in them, foo and bar, and then I'm going to serialize that string into JSON. And then I'm going to write that out to the window. And then just to make sure that everything works as expected, we can actually go list2, and let's just do the same thing. But we're, instead of serializing, let's deserialize, right? And all deserialization does is it just, you pass it in the type that you want to deserialize to. So in this case, it's a list of string. And in this case, it is JSON, right? So what this will do is it will just convert it back into a list of strings. So if I run this console application, what should happen is that this console window should pop open, and it should show me just that serialization, that string representation of that list of strings. So let's move that over here. Hopefully no error messages. And when it is all done, after all my symbols have loaded, there you have it. So foo and bar, right? So I can zoom in a little bit. So again, this is a very, very simple demo, but it shows you what's possible, right? So we took a .NET Framework class project, .NET Framework 4.5 to be exact, so noonsoft.json, and then we converted it, ported it using the porting assistant for .NET from .NET Framework 4.5 to .NET 6, and then we created a new .NET 6 console application and referenced that new project from there. So it just shows you what you can do. And what I wanted to do before I close up the video is I wanted to show you all of the GitHub repositories that you can take a look at to get more information here. The first one that I want to show you is the AWS, and let's just zoom in here. Let AWS/CTA. So this is the Code Translation Assistance project, which shows all of some of the features of Porting Assistant that help automate some aspects of their porting experience. So inside of here, there's a predetermined set of rules for database connectivity, MVC, what have you, right? I highly recommend, if you're interested, to take a look at this repository and learn more about that code translation tool, because I think it really is helpful to understand what actually Porting Assistant is doing. The next thing you can do is you can take a look at the Porting Assistant .NET Client, which is the standalone compatibility analyzer that helps port .NET Framework to .NET Core, .NET 6. And again, this is all on GitHub, and you can take a look at the source code and what's going on here. The next one is the IDE extension. So I showed you the IDE extension and some of the different experiences that you get. This is the actual V6 for that. So to be able to take a look at the extension, see what's going on there is also really valuable. And finally, the UI. So this is the standalone utility for the porting system, the one that I showed you that has the visualizations and things like that. So again, these are just some GitHub repositories that can help us take a look at some of the different capabilities that AWS provides to modernize .NET Framework applications. And there you have it, a handful of different ways, whether you like the standalone utility or the Visual Studio extension, ways to modernize our .NET Framework apps from .NET Framework to .NET 6, .NET 7. And so I hope you liked it. And if you do like it, be sure to like, subscribe, content, share along, and let me know what other sort of content you'd love to see. I want to hear from you and see some of the great things that you're doing with .NET AWS. So that's it from me today. I'm Isaac Levin, and this is AWS for the .NET Developer.